toward the mirror, fingertip to fingertip, and whisper, I know you, I know you. So I have written another book since finishing this one. Right now the title is The Ethics of Care, and the major tension of this next book is my inherited love languages come from my father. The way I know how to love and how I move in relationships comes from my father. But he doesn't know that I'm bisexual, so he doesn't know who I love. So the major tension of the book is those kind of two things kind of coming up and against each other, of trying to exist in the world as who I am versus who they see me as. So that's led to some very fun queer poems. So we're gonna read one that is just fun, because you'll see. Okay, this is triple sonnet to my OK Cupid matches. I don't mean to sound full of myself, but the men on these dating apps are not good enough. They're full of platitudes and compliments and awe, but lacking in personality or hobbies or interests. I can tell pretty quickly when someone likes me, and in the same amount of time I've decided that I'm not interested. The other day, this guy told me he'd love to read my poetry so he'd get tips on how to train AI. And after a week of me not responding, he sends a follow-up begging for my number because, hey, I devalue your craft, but I still want to smash. Imagine the thought process. Centering your want over my desire, it amazes me. When I tell them about my job, how I work with writers, teach poetry, do this art thing for a living, they're so fascinated, like they've never seen someone like me before, and they want always to know more. But y'all, I'm so bored of these men in finance and security, HVAC dispatchers and AI trainers, carless boys who put in no effort and demand reciprocity. Is it really so bad to desire more? Chapel Roan sings about the super ultra graphic modern girl, about not wasting a Friday night on a date, but only if she's beautiful and magic and dripping with glitter. And I imagine finding her, some otherworldly girl strapped with wings, waiting for me out in this central Pennsylvania wasteland, amidst the conservative boys and their guns and fish and deer and bad conversations. I want a girl, someone soft, sweet, spiced, loud, and mine. I still haven't told my father about the possibility of a two-bride wedding, 2 sets of mehendied palms, 2 daughters instead of 1. I try to forget that part, the part where he could say no. And I imagine, instead, being loved by a woman so enamored with me, all I ever see when I close my eyes is her. That was just so much fun to read. Okay. This next one I wrote, wait, these are double-sided. Okay. Does anyone here watch anime? Do you know the movie, do you know the show Angel Beats?
Yes!
Yeah, okay, it's an older one, so I wasn't sure.
I love that one.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm just mentioning that because I mentioned Angel Beats in the title. So if you know, you know. If you don't, it's okay, you'll still understand the poem. The reason I'm an organ donor is because I watched Angel Beats when I was 14. And it springs to life again when I watch Will Smith in 7 Pounds, how I too have an obsession with jellyfish, the contemplation of after. I'd be lying if I said every time I'd thought about killing myself, I hadn't also wondered how to best keep my organs intact, how quick to notify paramedics to rescue what could be salvaged, a kind of warped kintsugi, taking the broken parts and reassembling them elsewhere. Would a heart not glimmer anew in another body? If I wasn't going to use it, why not give it away? I don't think about dying nearly as much these days. It feels like an inconvenience, having to leave my passwords and manuscripts, unanswered emails, and long-distance friends. How will everyone find out? What if someone never does? The fear of a friend thinking I've simply phased them out of my life instead of actually, in fact, dying frightens me more than dying. Perhaps that's a convoluted way of looking at things, but it works. Keeps me from imagining an ending, lets me linger in the after and the inevitable wreckage. And while I may be a tsunami, I'm usually still there to manage the ruins, to piece things back together. I'm lucky to have lost in this lifetime so as to worry about who gets left behind. I don't have to wonder who will mourn me because I know now who loves me. And oh, is that not also a means of giving your heart away? one I wrote on a plane. Literally, I read Sara Ghazal Ali's Theophanies, highly recommend, great collection. She's a friend of mine. I read her poetry collection on a flight to AWP on my first flight last year, and immediately wrote this poem, and then I got it published like 2 weeks later, and now it's nominated for a pushcart, which is great. But just one of those poems that just like immediately comes off the dome and is done when it's on the page. It just happens, it's a miracle, it doesn't happen often enough, but it happens. But I've come to really love this poem. So this is Carving Rivers. The days have been heavy lately, an albatross on each shoulder. Gravity tightens its grip on me, more pulled towards center earth, molten core. If I stepped foot on my lawn, there'd be imprint. Footsteps in dirt from the sheer weight. I dream of wings, fashioning feathers out of dirty forks, unwashed silverware turned aeronautical feet, a sight of silver specking the skies. But I am not good with my hands. These palms slick with blood, calluses. I build rickety structures, perilous relationships. I think of Parvati sculpting Ganesh out of turmeric paste. Am I not too motherly, able to birth things worthwhile for this realm? Everything falls apart at my feet, scattered remains. I am all rage and nowhere to go. No Kali emerging from my forehead. I am clenched fists and tear-filled eyes. I've always hated that about myself, that I cry when I'm angry. What wrath do I exude when my body turns river? All I do is flood, overwhelm. I am too much water, not enough earth, nothing grounding. My father asks me every week about my plants, and I tell him they're alive, if barely. I imagine the person I could be if I was a place of bloom, if I'd be the same, if my father would worry as much as he does. I don't tell him about the heavy days, but I think he knows. The valley knows too well the river that cuts through it. So this next one is a formal poem. You can't tell when I read it, so I like to mention it. It's an abecedarian. So it's a 26-line poem where the first letter of each line is like in alphabetical order, so it's like A through C. Usually you can only catch it when you notice like X and you're like, who uses a word that starts with X in a poem? But this is the first and only abecedarian that I've ever written. And you can't tell when I'm reading it, but you'll catch maybe some of the language because there's like alliteration happening as well. But this is, I've moved on, but he lives in the crevices. After watching past lives, I don't cry, which surprises me because unfulfilled love settles itself at my very core. At the end of La La Land, my body turned fountain, dappled cheeks and heaving sobs, but no, this movie entered into my bloodstream, burrowed its way into femur and fibula, ricocheted through every solid part of me. Granted, I tried to tamper it, flatten it, roll it between my fingers, but how persistent it was to remind me that I did not have their love, inherited and aged, the kind where time stands still, a series of juxtaposed moments, all leading up to the inevitable end. Dear memory, be kind to me. If I were to see him again, I fear the eyes of a stranger looking back at me as if I had not imagined a whole universe of handmade memories, a 2-ceremony wedding, 3 kids, our lives nestled between playlists and video games and poems and, oh, there were never poems with him. My poems were always about the things most immediate to me, how quiet my mind was when we were together, how much room I regained after I left him. Leaving, even in love, causes a stuttering, a dissonance. In the movie, Greta Lee weeps and time collapses. It's amazing how people from your past can undo you, revert you back to that age again like you haven't lived a lifetime veering away from that version of yourself. I don't want to be 18 again, waiting on a boy who promises to love me but not know me. If you x-rayed my heart, you'd see me and him, trapped between the years of holding on to each other. I wonder some days if he could be zip-locked away into the recess, if I could hide him away for good. And then I wrote this poem last week, so no one's heard it, and it's very gay, so, which is why it's titled Good Luck, Babe. Okay, all right. I don't swipe right on girls, not because I don't find them beautiful or interesting or full of light, but only that I don't want them to think they are an experiment, a temporary moment in time, an aurora borealis of my dating history. I watch Heartstopper and think, is this a reflection of me? A girl that so badly wants a girl that she always picks a boy? I am terrified of hurting a woman by not being sure of who I am, that I leave this entire side of myself untended. Would she not look at me, bewildered, nearly 30 and not once with a woman? Is it too late to have someone show me the ropes? Is it all that different? Honestly, I know how to hold someone, how to kiss someone, how to see a whole universe in a pair of eyes. I keep imagining an ending, a closed door, a meteor that flashes in the sky and burns out. I think I am afraid I may change my mind, or rather, I think I am afraid I may not. What would it mean for the trajectory of my life to marry a woman, to love a woman? My birth chart is split 50% masculine, 50% feminine. I am a coin. Heads, I do what is expected of me. Tails, I flip everything on its head. No man has ever been able to hold all of me. What of a woman? Maybe even then, I am too much. Would it not then be better, be easier to settle, to bring home the expected son-in-law for my father? Would my priest even wed us? I saw the moon today, low and bright in the sky, and stared, shouted out loud at how full and present and there it was. I think about the stories of the moon loving the sun, how she is reflected light, a mirror of the day and night. I wonder if I could be someone's sun, if I could make her brighter just by her loving me. Imagine loving her. Thank you. Cool, so I guess we just transition into Q&A. What questions do we have? I'm happy to answer anything about earthly gods. I'm happy to talk about my new project. Happy to answer anyway. So. Yeah.
What other animes have you watched?
I've seen so many, it's kind of bad. I've been watching anime since I was like 8. No, probably before that, because I started with like Dragon Ball Z and Naruto. And I watch all of the current ones. Like I'm watching the Apothecary Diaries right now.
I love Apothecary Diaries.
Yeah, it is my favorite show
Did
from
you
last
read
year.
the manga?
No, but I bought the manga.
You're in for a treat, I have to say. I have to say.
I'm very excited.
You should be.
Yeah, no, I watch a lot of anime, and it tends to inspire poems too, which I think is fun. The very first poem that I read, I Am Unfit to Raise Daughter, was actually inspired by a Naruto episode, which you would not know if you read it, but I put it in the notes at the back of the book because I thought it was fun. But there's an episode with a character that like fights using his bones, and that gave me an idea and reminded me of how much I know about poems, which is a weird amount that I know about poems. But that's just like the poet life. You know random things about obscure stuff, and that's how poetry works. You just use your obscure knowledge. And then in my next book, I've written a couple poems about like Warren High School Host Club, and some other things. And then I also write about like Bollywood movies, so like media and pop culture is a huge component of what I write and how I absorb media and how I respond to media. I think it really plays into the way that I view storytelling as well. So yeah.
How long on average does it take for you to write your poetry?
So when I was here as a student and I was in SU Slam, we would write for 20-minute bursts. And we would do a prompt and then we write for 20-minute bursts. I don't know what you guys do now, but that's what we did. So I learned how to write entire poems in 20 minutes. And that's how I write. I get the trigger for a poem and then I sit there and I write the whole thing. And I do it in one sitting. It's not always 20 minutes, but I do write the whole poem in one sitting, the first draft. And then if I'm still feeling like I want to work on it, I'll do subsequent drafts in that same sitting. So maybe 2 to 3 hours to come to an almost final draft. There are certain poems, obviously you come to the end point of it and you're like, maybe this needs to sit for a little bit and I'll come back to it. And I've done that with certain things where it's just like, this isn't fully there yet and I know that and I know it can be better, so I'm gonna let it sit and come back to it. But for the most part, I write things pretty quickly. Like the Good Luck Babe that I read, I wrote in probably 45 minutes. And that was the finished product in 45 minutes. So I'm used to producing pretty quickly. That said, I go through spurts of like not writing. So I finished The Ethics of Care, my second manuscript, in July of last year, and then I almost didn't write for about 6 months. I think I wrote maybe 4 poems in the last 6 months, and then it kind of started to come back last week with Time to Read. I read Faylita Hicks's new book, which is phenomenal. I can't remember the title right now, but it's so good. I met her in Chicago when I was doing my reading, and she's fabulous. But usually when I'm not writing, I'll do a lot of reading. So I read a lot. I primarily read poetry collections, and that'll be what kind of triggers new writing. But yeah. So anywhere from like 45 minutes to 3 hours will take to come up with a fully finished draft.
Before coming to Susquehanna, or at any point in your writing career, did you ever write anything other than poetry, or has poetry always been your style?
So I actually started in fiction. I was a really obnoxious child that told lots of stories. So the minute people told me to stop talking, I went to writing. And I was like, okay. I definitely worked on like fantasy novels and short stories. And when I applied to Susquehanna, I applied with a split packet. It was half poetry and it was half fiction. It was an excerpt from a short story that I had been working on. No, it was an excerpt from a novel that I had been working on. I tried to write 2 or 3 novels in high school. And then I got to college and poetry just kind of overtook everything for me. Poetry has always been, fiction is what I've done for love, and poetry is what I've done for survival. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I've been coming back to fiction in recent years. I had my first publication in fiction in Passages North last year, which was really exciting. I wrote that in grad school, and it was like a bit of speculative fiction, but I also write nonfiction. When I took that class with Professor Dent, I found my love for nonfiction. I'd never really realized that was a thing you could do, and my poetry is so confessional anyway, so it kind of plays into that well. So I still write nonfiction. When I was in grad school, I took a lot of nonfiction classes, and so I started doing nonfiction once I was in college. But before that, it was mostly a lot of fiction and poetry. Yeah.
What's it like to publish writing that is confessional about family members, and how does that influence what you put out into the world to get published?
Yeah, so I was mortified of my mother reading this book. And one of the reasons was there's a direct address poem in here where I talk about being bisexual. And I knew that she was going to read the book, and I knew that she'd clock it. So even if it was veiled in any way, she would clock it. So that was kind of my deadline to come out to her. I was like, this makes sense. So I came out to my mom in May of last year. The book came out in September, and that went well. Luckily, the poem went over my father's head, so he does not know still, which is why the whole next book is about him. But for a while, I write primarily about my family, and usually I started writing about my mom, and that was really complicated because I had complicated feelings about our relationship. And I think for a while I didn't submit those poems for publication because I was worried about it. And then after a certain point, I was like, you know what? This is my work. It is what it is. She's gonna have to deal with it. And luckily for me, since the book came out, my family has been super supportive. They've been really receptive to the work and haven't really like come at me with anything, which I was worried that I would have to come deal with that, but it hasn't. So it's really more of a matter of like, I think I needed to write for me, and I wanted to prioritize my writing and myself, and the chips fall where they may, kind of. That said, with coming out to my dad, my deadline is when the next book gets picked up. So, but yeah.
Okay.
During your reading, I saw a lot of like beautiful reoccurrences of like wings and freedom and flight and those kinds of themes. And I was wondering like what draws you to always revisit them within separate poems?
Yeah, I think the way my brain works when it comes to poetry is that everything I've ever written is connected to each other, which I've found out is not how everybody else works, which I found out in grad school. But the recurring themes and motifs are things that I've absorbed from other media specifically. So I associate like freedom and lightness with that kind of feeling of flying. And I think I come back to it because when I'm trying to find words for this feeling of lightness, that's what comes to mind. It's this feeling of being in the air and being free of like any other constraints. And I think that's just the case for any of my recurring imagery. I have associations and it only makes sense for me to return to them. I think every poem anyone writes is speaking back to the poetry that already exists in the world. So nothing you ever write is truly new because you're a part of a larger sphere of things that are happening. So my references to wings and freedom is not new, you know. It's calling back to other poets that have also used that imagery as well and that have done it in media and those kind of things. And I feel like it puts you in conversation with other works of art, which I think is only a benefit to be in conversation with other writers. I feel like that's how I view the recurring imagery. It's more like it's a conversation. Thank you.
I noticed that in a couple of your poems you talk about like internal systems, like the first one you're all about how your organs like built you up and building up your kids, and you mentioned your wings in a few of them. So what does like your body and like those internal representations mean most in your poetry?
Yeah, I feel like I think about the act of like physical deconstruction a lot and what it means for the body to come apart when the body can't come apart. So the metaphorical coming apart and what it feels like. I think having lived with depression and bipolar disorder and anxiety, just mental health in general, I feel like sometimes it feels like you're coming loose in ways. And so that imagery makes sense to me when it's like, okay, if I'm going to protect someone else, I'm going to take a part of myself off and give it to them. And that's my metaphorical way of doing it. With the first poem, I took an anatomy class in high school, so I learned all the bones in the body. So I could visualize kind of taking it apart. And it felt like, I feel like for that poem in particular, with conversations of motherhood and having a daughter and being a woman and having a matrilineal lineage, I think a lot about my mother and my grandmother. So I very naturally think about having a daughter and what it means for me to take care of her properly. So I think in that poem, it's a lot about how do I give her what she needs, and if what she needs is all of me, then I'm willing to give her all of me, even if it leads to me being left with nothing. And I think that's kind of what goes into it. But yeah. Other questions about poems?
Away from the poetry, but how do you know so much about bones? Because that was like this whole time.
It's the anatomy class that I took in high school. I loved anatomy. It was so much fun. I was not good at like chemistry and physics. I liked biology, and so when I was able to take an anatomy class, it was probably my favorite class that I took that year. I was taking AP Psych and anatomy, and they kind of went hand in hand, which was really interesting because I would have AP Psych and we would learn about the mental state of the body, and then I would go into anatomy and we learned about the physical state of the body, and the lessons kind of lined up in a way. So I was learning about, like we were learning about ears at the same time we were talking about ears in anatomy. So I was like putting all this information in my head, and I just kind of remembered the words, and I think that's a big part of it. I remember language really vividly, and I also used to draw a lot. So I've thought about anatomy and physiology when it comes to putting the body together. And I think just like seeing it in that Naruto episode that I mentioned, visualized it for me as like, what if you took the bones out of the body and what that would look like. So I think it's definitely really weird that I still remembered all of the bones many, many years later, because I think I wrote that poem in 2019. I took anatomy in 2013. Yeah. 2013, 2014 in my senior year of high school. So I think things that are really interesting to me just stick. So I remember a lot of like psychology terms that I learned in high school, and I remember other terminology from other poets that I haven't accessed in a really long time. It's just kind of like, there's this just permanent bank in my head that's just running with language that I reach for anytime I want to talk about something. But yeah. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. Who wants to ask the final question?
Are there any poets who have inspired your own writing, like some of the ones you've read, or like Monica Prince, or any that you've read about?
Monica Prince is one of them, definitely. It was great because when Monica came at my senior year of college, we were sitting in the Writers Institute, and I was sitting in a chair, and she was standing in the front of the room introducing herself to all the like slam kiddos, and then she offhandedly was like, "Oh yeah, Guyanese royalty," and I like perked up, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And then assaulted her after the meeting, and was like, "Are you Guyanese? I'm Guyanese. What are you doing here?" Because it's central Pennsylvania. What are you doing here? So Monica was a big one in writing honestly about family and how you really feel about certain situations. Because I think when I was here, I was still writing kind of veiled work. It took a while for me to like break into honesty with my poetry. So Monica is one of them, definitely. But Aja Monet is a big one for me. Her collection, My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter, is really pivotal for my writing and all of my poetics. Franny Choi is another huge one. Soft Science is one of my favorite collections of all time. And in my book, there are 3 epigraphs. 2 of those, one is Aja Monet and one is Franny Choi. So there's huge ones. Hugh Min Win is another really big one for me. I found out recently that he has a 3rd book coming soon, and I'm very excited about that. Denez Smith is another one who I got to like hang out with last fall because they came to Bucknell, and I got to go to dinner with them 5 times that week. It was wild. And yeah, Aja Monet, Franny Choi, Hugh Min Win. Sarah Kay is a big one. She's probably the reason I started seriously taking poetry seriously. Was hearing her poem Point B, which is like a TED Talk if you've ever heard it. It's on Google, it's on YouTube. That's great. Yeah, Sarah Kay. It's a lot of spoken word poets who have since then moved away from spoken word but are still writing in that kind of vernacular. But yeah. Cool. Thank you guys.
Okay, just to close it out, make sure you enjoy the art. This is this fantastic show that just went up. We had the reception on Saturday night, and the curator was here talking about this ancient technique called encaustics, where hot pigmented wax is melted and all of the pieces have that in common. So take a turn around the art gallery, thank our art interns for letting us be here, get Jessica to sign your book if you want, and go to the Slam Masterclass at 7 o'clock if you're into hearing more about how to write poems in 20 minutes. That's amazing. Anyway, thank you so much, Jess.